It's a skill that is needed in OT networks because as these networks become more connected, as we want to pull in more data for AI use cases or do predictive maintenance, or we want to leverage cloud, IT needs to be involved. But what IT needs to realize is OT is a very different landscape. Whenever we do our upgrades on our laptops, I'm sure there is a whole host of support tickets that come in, and IT desks are like, this application is broken, I can't get access to my email because you upgraded my laptop and it doesn't work. We can't afford that in OT. They can't just start pressing upgrade buttons all over the plant and letting things shut down because that costs money.
Hey, I'm Dino Busalaki, the Chief Technology Officer and OT guy at Velta Technology.
Hi, I'm Jim, the COO and IT guy.
And I'm Craig Duckworth, President and CEO.
You're listening to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Show.
In each episode, we bring you the inside scoop on the world of industrial cybersecurity.
We talk about everything you don't know
that you should know. So plug in and power up. The show's about to get started.
Hi, my name is Dino Busalaki, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Velta Technology. And today, we have Andrew McPhee from Cisco Systems, who is the Solutions Manager for their OT cybersecurity.
Hey, Dino.
So I guess I want to begin this by stating, what is your role, even though I stated it in the intro there, but what is your role in regarding OT cybersecurity for Cisco Systems?
Yes, I'm a solution manager or solution architect. You can use either one of those terms for industrial security. And industrial security is something that spans across many verticals. I work as part of our Cisco validated design team. And those validated designs are a way that we bring our technologies, normally with a customer, but we take a solution, we validate it in a lab, we do the due diligence of testing it to give a reference design of how to do, say, manufacturing deployments, railway deployments in the real world, so our customers can take that reference. And I do that for security. So whenever we're doing our railway designs or transportation designs, substation designs, how do we do that in a secure way? And my role is the architecture, the validation, and the output of those guides.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that I've witnessed over my years of working in this space, and this is a recent project I was working on. We were working with a controls engineer at a plant, and he flat out admitted that he wasn't a network guy, but yet he was responsible for all of the Cisco switches. And even though they were Rockwell switches, the Stratic switches, which are Cisco under the hood, he had no formal network skills at all, per se. And I thought it was interesting that they got this very large plant loaded with Cisco technology, right, running their control systems, and the guy managing it doesn't have a network background. As funny as that may sound, and it's very common. And so the question I've always been, pushing Cisco, when you say validated design, that means a lot. And I hope a lot of people dig into what that means when you talk about a Cisco validated design and what comes with that. I think is very important when you think about the CPW and the reason why that exists. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because I feel that there's still a disconnect between the IT world, networking professionals that know how to design and build and manage and support networks. In an OT environment, it's kind of so-so. And jumping that Rubicon, I found has been very difficult for that convergence between IT and OT. I don't, maybe Cisco sees it differently, but how have you witnessed that in these relationships between IT and OT?
You definitely create a different skill set while both present technology roles. They're very different. My actual background, I was a mechatronics engineer. That's what I studied. That's what I did in college. I was ready to take a role of an automation engineer here in Europe, and I'd done an internship at Cisco and fell in love with IoT and went from there and fell into it. But during my time of mechatronics and learning how to build the robots and program the production lines, I didn't know what networking was. When I joined Cisco, I didn't know what a UDP packet was, TCP, and never mind security. But yet, we have engineers who go to university and study for 4 years to get degrees. They're still very technically skilled, just in a completely different area. IT needs to come down to the OT to help digitize and connect that OT network. It's a skill that is needed in OT networks because as these networks become more connected, as we want to pull in more data for AI use cases or do predictive maintenance, or we want to leverage cloud, IT needs to be involved. But what IT needs to realize is OT is a very different landscape. whenever we do our upgrades on our laptops, I'm sure there is a whole host of support tickets that come in, and IT desks are like, this application is broken and I can't get access to my email because you upgraded my laptop and it doesn't work. We can't afford that in OT. They can't just start pressing upgrade buttons all over the plant and letting things shut down because that costs money. So when the IT and the OT convergence, it's not just a technology convergence, but it's actually a persona convergence, that the OT engineers are becoming more responsible for networking and they need to upskill into more networking domains. But the IT team also need to realize that they're not off the hook in terms of their development. They need to understand OT networks, the criticality of it, the new protocols that exist, and understand the needs of the users that they're servicing. Because what you don't want to happen, and I've seen it happen multiple times, IT and OT butt heads because they're not actually working towards the same goal, and they become two separate teams in the same company. Those who are successful, they know how to merge and combine.
It's a good point, because I think it's because they serve different masters. The organization is different. Sometimes you find that IT and OT management tree, that structure, the first time they actually have the same common boss manager is at the very top of the organization, sometimes the CEO of the company, which is really a bad place to have it. And I've witnessed it two ways. I've witnessed this IT OT bumping heads, as you mentioned, because you have IT reporting up through their traditional management structure. But I've also seen organizations that have carved out their own IT professional skill set that work for the line of business, for that business unit, if you will, not for the CIO. Back in the day, and I guess it's still true today, the shadow IT groups, right? And so the question I always try to answer, even myself, is what's the best way to handle this? I don't see a CIO becoming the next plant manager, per se. So the question is how do you get that IT required skill set that you need, everything that comes with it, cybersecurity, networking, applications, all of that stuff, underneath the umbrella of the business units, it's the revenue generating side of the business, right? Versus the overhead OpEx group that doesn't have the same pain points that plant floor organization has.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I've seen be successful is when the OT teams or that OT chain hire IT skill set. That there's users out there. When we think of IT personas, people who work in IT, they don't want to be stuck in a server room all day, just looking at lights flashing and putting on headphones so they don't go deaf. If you give IT personnel the opportunity to work with these machines and to go out to these wind farms and to work on oil rigs and really interesting engineering projects that networking is involved, they'll jump at the opportunity. And especially early in career IT people, if you give them that opportunity to work on something fun, they'll grab onto it two hands. And
great point. I agree. Yeah, you're right. Because I worked for Rockwell for a period of time, and some of the projects I worked, and even for system integrators on that front. And if a client was putting, let's say, a new packaging line in, when we were starting those projects, there wasn't IT people sitting in the room as part of that discussion on what type of network was going to be chosen to design and build, what technology we were going to use, whose stuff we were going to use, what operating systems we were going to run those HMIs and historians and engineering workstations on. The only time IT really got involved with a project of that size and scope was when it came time to connect it to the network, and we're asking for an IP address and a port on the network somewhere to connect up. And that's not good enough, to your point. You're right. We call it OT adoption, Andrew, from front-end engineering design all the way through to development and design of that machine to the startup and then maintenance and support on the backside. IT needs to be a part of that whole thing, in my view, in order to understand that the challenges are there from a safety perspective, from process integrity perspective, right, operational perspectives, that they have to be involved in understanding that, which gets me back to Cisco, right, which was one of the challenges I've seen with Cisco, because you guys have been in this game for a long time. You guys have, from a networking perspective, you guys are it, in my view, in regards to industrial control system, CVD designs that are out there that we can deploy. But when I look at the Cisco organization, crossing into that OT space has been tough for the business development people, the account management teams. And quite frankly, Andrew, I have witnessed executives on the IT side begging Cisco not to go over there and kick that hornet's nest, because I didn't want to be a part of it, right? Don't drag me over there into that thing because I don't want to be involved in it, right? Cisco being told that by their client, which I think is tough. I don't know if you witnessed that, but I have.
Yeah, the thing about Cisco's been in. I think we've been doing rugged equipment now for. I think we hit the 20-year mark recently. So it's been a long time.
It has.
When we talk about rugged equipment, it's just a chassis. It's just the hardware that allows our software to run in environments that are higher in temperature, it's dusty, there's vibration, allowing our boxes to run in places where the machines live. Under the hood, it's the same software that we've been developing for even longer than that. It's iOS XE for anyone who is nerdy enough to know what that means. It's the underlying software of our switches and our routers. We have wireless APs. And what this allows is these IT professionals that we mentioned that have been developing their skills in a traditional IT space and cybersecurity professionals who've developed their skills in traditional IT spaces to be given the same set of tools and capabilities when they do transition into the OT. So while there's a learning curve of I need to understand the needs of an OT space, the software and the tools they're going to use are the exact same thing. So their skills can resonate there. And you mentioned working for Rockwell, the Stratix line is all iOS XE. It's just a respin of the same Cisco boxes. So the infrastructure that we put in place is trusted. It's been tested. We are, I think, officially the number one networking company in this space in the world, and there's a reason for that. And even when you leave the rugged space, the very first switch that machine hits is probably a Cisco switch. Even if you're not using Cisco in the machine, that machine probably connects to a Cisco switch somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that convergence happen more and more, and these IT folks coming down into the OT. And I definitely think the divide is starting to bridge more and more every year.
Yeah. Some of the machine builders, the OEMs, they're building a $20 million piece of equipment and they'll put in a $100 switch, right? And they'll send that to the client. We see that a lot. I was in a plant just a few weeks ago and I'll find no less than 15 to a dozen different switching technologies inside of one manufacturing facility across 50 panels. And it's because they buy a machine from Italy, and then they buy one from Germany, and then they buy one from South America, right? And all these machines show up with all these different switching platforms in them, and so that's where IT, generally speaking, when I'll call that the OT network in the general sense, the control side, they just want to ignore that, right? They're looking for a way to tap down and say, look, I'll manage to the IDF level, layer 3, level 3, and I'm out. Right. After that, what happens down there, it's out of my control. And then I do have clients that will have an opportunity to standardize on a switching platform, and they will select the Cisco switching platform, which is a good thing. But I still find that the complexities of a Cisco iOS platform in there is really hard for the engineering teams to manage. Where IT could do it, no problem. OT, not so much, right? And so they want to dumb it down as much as they can. And to them, they just want to plug things in. They want them to work, not try to figure out, well, how should I control this traffic in here? And where do I want to create the segmentation and stop these certain flows that don't need to happen? The OT guys don't tend to want to get into that game. And that's the challenge on that side of the fence from an OT perspective. And I also think that I'd like to see more, if you don't have the talent in-house, then hire it out. Just like IT does. Why do we have all these outsourcing organizations out there today providing professional services for the IT business? Well, you can do the same thing on the control system side too. You can.
For sure. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest drivers of this change will come from the cybersecurity mandates that are starting to come down. So NIS2 is going to be mandated this year across all of Europe, and that they got really strict with their policies. And we see the Biden administration putting in critical infrastructure protection plans. And there's a lot of underlying frameworks of how to be secure in these OT environments. And we try to make things easy with things like zero touch provisioning. So when you plug switches in, it connects back to some IT control templates, and then we can configure the network for you without really touching it. But there's always complexity when it comes to more functionality.
Right.
But when we introduce, say, cheaper functionality or less feature-rich functionality, I should say, We don't know what vulnerabilities we're bringing into the network with that. You mentioned that these machines might have 15 different vendors inside one machine. Are all 15 vendors following best development practices to make sure that their hardware is kept up to date? The answer is probably no.
Safety, maybe safety. They might be good about that, but
yeah, they got to be certified. So,
right.
And I think that's where we're getting to in terms of like the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe as well, where we want to have more secure products put into these OT networks, and the switching and the networking infrastructure is part of that. But we're not the only ones. It's every piece of equipment that's going to make up this machine. The machine builders are going to have to be better certified, and the integrators, they're going to demand more from machine builders because they're going to be the ones to get audited to say, as a manufacturer, you meet standards X, Y, and Z, and if not, you're going to get fined. So you better make sure you mandate the machine builders to start putting more due diligence into the hardware and the software vendors they put in there. And with these kind of switches built into the machine, it's just an easy button. We tested and we validated this machine with this vendor in the lab, and we start selling this model number on 2008, and we've kept it the same ever since. And we're not switching it now because we have to go back and recertify it, revalidate, and do QA on it as a process. So if you're not in there from day one, they're in no rush to push it out. But maybe these mandates will make that change. And I'm not going to say Cisco's not the only vendor there, but making sure you have better choices in the hardware that you put in there, and the switching being a big part of that.
Yeah, let's pivot a little bit to Cisco Cybervision, the OT IDS ranks of these technologies, and getting back to the supply chain, right? The OEMs and system integrators that are supplying technologies in this environment. What is your thoughts on how tools like Cybervision should be able to assist not only the supply chain that's providing these machine centers to these clients, but also to the client and expectations? Just like you mentioned, something that was key when I mentioned safety is certifying, right? These machines have to be safe. There's certain certifications. Do you envision OTIDS having to be part of that machine build so the client knows what they've got when they get it from a digital perspective?
Yeah, and for those who maybe aren't aware, Cybervision is Cisco's tool that does asset discovery and vulnerability detection on plant floor. So we'll tell you, here's all the assets that exist in the network that are active on your network, and by the way, here's the vulnerabilities on them, because we know that the firmware version that's running them and other details that give us that information. And we can see it already with NERC SIP. So NERC have just been told by FERC, who's the entity above NERC, to say we need to extend substation security to not only look at the boundary, but also within the critical zone, the ESP, electronic security perimeter. And they're enhancing it with a functionality called INSM, internal network security monitoring. And it's everything you just said. IDS within the perimeter, baselining within the perimeter. Tell me what exists, tell me what's changing, how can I react to any sort of indicators of compromise quicker using visibility. And I think that's going to be something that gets brought in at the machine level for all industries. NERC has normally been a little bit ahead of other industries in terms of the regulations they put in. It wouldn't surprise me if NIST2 starts mandating visibility all throughout the network. I do actually have a customer story where they had a separate IT and OT team, like we mentioned earlier on. And they didn't butt heads. They knew their responsibilities. We were IT, you were OT. And IT put a firewall at the OT edge to say, we're going to protect the OT network through a firewall. And all of the VLANs in the network that terminated this firewall, and if you want to go from one network zone to the next, you have to cross the firewall that IT managed. And that was okay. They got a cybersecurity audit and they failed. And the reason that they failed is because the OT network was daisy chained. All the PLCs, the OT guys just went and put one PLC into the other, and turns out the traffic was never hitting those firewalls. And they had one flat network underneath IT controller structure.
Very common.
Very common. That's what visibility gives you. If you can't segment and you don't control all of the switching and all of the infrastructure, and you're not authenticating all the devices, you still need the visibility to understand what's going on. You shouldn't have to walk down the plants to understand what's connected to your network. What are they talking about? Tools like Cybervision is that way to give you that automatic input into what is really connected, what's really happening, and do I need to pick up the phone to the OT team to say, let's make this happen in a better way.
Well, I can tell you for a fact, and we've done, I bet, in the past 2 years, probably 100 sites. When we put in these OT IDS tools like Cybervision, what is found is not what the client necessarily thinks is going on in their environment. What I mean by that is they will tell us things that are not true, whether they really know for a fact or they're trying to avoid something that they think is unpleasant. We find it not true. And what I mean by that is they will tell us that this machine center is not connected to the network. That's not true.
Yeah. My favorite one is we have an air gap network and then we light up all
doesn't
the
exist.
IP addresses.
It does not exist. I've yet to find one, right? I mean that realistically, I've yet to find one. Even clients that actually have a machine that's out there standalone, and will find a cradle point cellular modem in it connected to the internet. I've had CISOs argue with me this network is not connected, and we go out there and find that it is. We find things on their network they had no idea that were there that are uncovered. So again, the goal is to remove the mystery. That's what we're after here is get your asset inventory, true it up, continuously monitor it. And I want you to touch on the Cisco strategy around that, because I think it's one of the best on how to collect this stuff versus having to build sprawl networks inside these manufacturing facilities to get that information when you can move it within the Cisco switching fabric.
Yeah, Cisco are in that kind of fortunate position that we are the networking infrastructure and we embed our visibility directly in that switch. In order to understand what's happening on the network, there's two ways of doing it. There's the passive way of just listening and sniffing all of that traffic. And traditionally, if you don't own the network, you'd have to take additional cables or run additional traffic over a network that wasn't built for additional overhead. And it's costly and it's hard to get access to. And you end up doing passive discovery too high up the network. And you don't really see the things that you're actually trying to investigate. Or you can do active discovery. And that's where you send discovery requests into the network and wait for those devices to respond back. And there's still a lot of hesitation about doing that because people get very uncomfortable when you say, I'm going to speak to your OT network. So Cisco can do both. We can do both passive and active. But we use passive, but we do passive inside the switching. So as your devices are using the Cisco switching already for the connectivity, we're listening for that traffic, looking at what those assets are, what are they doing, and you get a full understanding of your network without any additional hardware. It's just software that gets added into the Cisco infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a very elegant design, in my opinion, right? Being a networking guy from my background, if you want to do this the right way, that definitely is the right way to approach it. On the active versus passive, you're spot on. Ideally, you want to try to, if you're going to go active, you do that after you've been crawling and walking for a while, number one. Number two, again, of all the shops that we've gone into, we find IT scanning the OT network all the time. So for somebody to sit there and say, hey, we don't want that traffic. We don't want you scanning our network. They're already doing it. Rapid7, I can find all kinds of tools that IT's using in their environment. Arctic Wolf, take your pick. All these different companies that are out there that are doing IT support or trying to do they're already bleeding into the OT network. And we find it right out of the gate. First thing we usually see is you're scanning the OT network. And some of the IT people, they think that that's perfectly fine. They do.
Yeah.
Because, it's never caused any problems. It's like, well, if you're not in production meetings every day, how do you know you're not causing problems? And I'll tell you that you are, because I've seen COM faults on PLCs because you scanned the network. I've witnessed it, right? I lost my filler because you were scanning the network, so I could put liquid in a can or a bottle for 3 hours while we cleaned up the mess and reset everything. I lost a couple hours at $50,000 an hour, right?
And that's because their traditional IT discovery tools, they're using traditional IT discovery mechanisms. They scan the network, they try to find open ports, they try to interpret what that means based on these open ports. With cyber vision, we're not just doing traditional port scans and figuring out, okay, well, here's a device, if it's on port 502, it must be Modbus, or 44818 must be SIP or Ethernet IP. We speak the native protocol. So the same way when you open up RS Logix in your factory, and RS Logix says, well, I'm going to find all of the Rockwell PLCs that I can go and program and upload, and it sends out discovery messages. Cybervision can do the same. And it comes from the sensor. So that same infrastructure we mentioned about how the switch is doing all the passive, the switch also does all the active. It can reach out to the things directly connected to it in the native protocol that it expects. So if it's Ethernet IP for Rockwell, or maybe Siemens S7, or Modbus to go to SNMP to a switch
right?
if you need to.
Delta V.
It's whatever protocol these devices are speaking to. And to your point, maybe there's a crawl phase of passive. And okay, I know this is a Rockwell device, but I haven't seen enough information to know what type of Rockwell device it is. Let me just ping it with the Rockwell message, just one unicast message that built device. I don't need to scan the whole network to do this.
Yeah.
So it gives the IT teams the outcome that they're looking for in what's on my network, what is it doing, but they're using the right tool for their job in this case.
Well, and with the integrations of this Cybervision, you can give IT just about anything they need off that plant floor without having to have them go down there to get it, right? There's the integrations coming up from Cybervision into your SIM tools and into your firewalls, intrusion prevention systems. It can do all that stuff. The key is, to your point, moving from being a butcher to a surgeon, because I know that may not be a good analogy, but when I see brute force scans just spewing down onto the network from the IT side, I just know that it's wreaking havoc in the environment. That's one of those reasons why IT and OT butt heads, right? Because OT suspects that the reason why I'm losing pieces of my production periodically is that without physically having a mechanical issue, it's like, okay, who hit me? Where did it come from, right?
Yeah, and that's why they need to work together, because from an OT perspective, these same guys that aren't giving me access to the cloud because it's too insecure and it might bring down the production network are the same people sending port scans and shutting down my production network. It's just having that understanding, and I think that's where IT folks who've been equipped with the right tools, but also work for the OT, is a really good combination.
Well, there's a stat, and I say this a lot in a lot of my podcasts, and it comes from you, it comes from your competitors and your peers in the industry, is 60% of manufacturers out there today are still in the unaware to aware phase of OT cybersecurity. You got 30% that have actually started doing something. Maybe they've done a POV, or they're starting to put a team together and they're starting to look at it. Maybe they put it in a few plants. And then you got 10% that are actually got a plan and a strategy, and they're running down the road to try to get better. That's the stat that I believe is still out there, and I witness it in a lot of the conversations that I have. I've got one this afternoon with a munitions manufacturer. They're just beginning, and I've got a handful right now that are in that beginning phase. So the question is, before we wrap up here, is, do you think AI might be something that would help move this along faster?
The quick answer is yes, but there's a more complicated answer, and that is, I have this belief, and I genuinely believe this, that security can and should be simple. And there's a lot of very simple things that we can do in order to better protect our networks. And AI is one of those things that can be used to help, but it's also can be used to exploit a network. And there's a stat I seen recently. Last year, I think 75% of detections were from non-malware based attacks. As in, most of the attacks that occur on these networks isn't so complicated malware that is going to ruin your systems. That might be an end goal, and that might happen after initial access to the network has happened. But social engineering is such a big part of cybersecurity, where someone can either pretend to be a legitimate person or can trick an administrator to give them access to a network. And AI is a big proponent of that, of using AI to mimic voices or mimic the cadence of text. So when you get an email from someone, it does look like it came from your boss because it's in the same writing style, and it was from their email address. And there's a lot of things that we can do to protect ourselves, such as using multi-factor authentication, using zero trust network access for remote access, having a secure perimeter. And I think AI would then enhance all of these easy things to do in our networks, but there's a certain foundation that we need to even focus on before we get to that AI conversation. How many of the people listening to this call are using the same password for all of the accounts in their personal lives? And is any one of those passwords also used to get access to their work? Because all it takes is one person to get exploited for then the whole network to be exploited. How many people use VPNs in their daily work lives but don't use multi-factor authentication? How many people, when they get to the OT network, have full wide open access to the OT network from the termination point of their VPN or their jump server? Simple questions that we can answer along the way. And when we do all that, can we use AI to better understand, was that user legitimate? Are they coming from a different country? Are they using a different device? There's all these other metrics we can layer on top to say, using machine learning, we can create a posture about you. And if your posture changes, we can alert administrators. But you got to do the simple stuff first. And a lot of these OT networks have yet to do the simple stuff. That's where I get them to start.
No, that's a great point. AI to me I think would be a way to help try to simplify some of the normal general activity that needs to be done, the hygiene stuff, right? And I think it can really help with that because I believe that 2/3 of disruption come from internal mistakes. 1/3 is what you were just describing there, but 2/3 of it is just them making mistakes, human error within their own house that's causing their unplanned and scheduled downtime and disruption. So, well, Andrew, I'm sure there's a lot of different things and ways we could have this discussion, but I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. This has been awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Podcast. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to cover, please leave us a review or let us know. If you're interested in learning more about Velta technology and how you can get safer sooner, visit veltatech.com. That's BELTA tech.com. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.